We have Ken Brinsden, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Pilbara Minerals Limited. A bit of a change of pace. Ken is a mining engineer with over 20 years' experience in surface and underground mining, including brownfields and greenfields development across a range of commodities. Ken has been with Pilbara Minerals since early 2016, having previously been Managing Director of Atlas Iron. This is his second outing, I think, with Pilbara Minerals, therefore, so over to you, Ken. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. A pleasure to be with you. Luke, you and I just saw that. We've been on the receiving end of a few sprays from Tony O'Neill over the years, and he definitely went over budget. So I reckon you and I, we got one back. Thanks very much for your attention, ladies and gentlemen. A pleasure to be with you. And obviously I'm going to talk about Pilbara Minerals, Pilgangoora project. And I'm going to make a pact with you. It's a lithium presentation, and I have to mention Tesla. But for you guys, special deal, I'm going to set the bar really low. It's only 20 times that I mention Tesla, otherwise the drinks are on me at the Palace tonight. So, we're developing the Pilgangoora project. We've finished all of the final environmental approvals, we've raised all the money to develop the mine, and we're now flat out in construction. And the North Pilbara is a pretty special place. There's 3 major pegmatite swarms in the North Pilbara, only about 100 kilometres or 120 kilometres from the port. There's Pilgangoora itself, there's Wodgina, and there's Mount Francisco. And based on what we've learned now about Pilgangoora and what we understand of the Wodgina resource, there is every reason to believe that Pilbara owns 2 of the 3 premier future lithium resources in the Pilbara and potentially Western Australia. So Pilgangoora, a very important string in the bow, under development. Mount Francisco, we are very much looking forward to drilling there a bit later on this year. Fantastic opportunity, and as I said, based on what's been known or what's now known about Pilgangoora and Wodgina, there is every reason to believe that that's got some serious future potential. So, what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about a background to the industry, lithium-ion battery technology, how the market's behaving, and of course there are still some skeptics out there about the lithium scene. I'll be doing my best, looking straight into your eyes, trying to convince you that actually this is the real deal. And then I'll explain why Pilgangoora is such an important part of the supply solution, why it's absolutely fit for the times that we're in. So lithium-ion batteries are in essence now the go-to rechargeable battery. The technology's been developed over 30 years, commercialised in the last decade or so, and now just starting to generate some serious scale. And the reason that it's become the preferred platform for battery technology is because of its lightweight, its high power, it's relatively green, and it's going to be it's already becoming, but going to become a very low cost technology, and I'll explain why that's the case shortly. And as a result, it's finding its way into all of the things that you're hearing about. Cars, transportation, it was, for the last decade at least, it's probably been in your phone, in your laptops and your tablets, and then again, more recently, for renewables and grid storage. And there is some phenomenal compound growth rates underlying the application of that lithium-ion battery technology. And as a result, a lot more lithium is required to come out of the ground. And across the battery materials sphere, I've taken some data out of a Roskill presentation where they speak to basically today's market as it applies to current uses, and then imagines what happens as the lithium-ion battery market grows. And it's patently clear that the key commodity to be in, as far as battery technology is concerned, is lithium. It sits at the heart of the battery, and it's got to grow a phenomenal amount according to Roskill's updated data. So that market's going to grow between now and about 2026. It's going to grow by 250%. It's going to grow by over 500% according to Roskill by 2030. But it might only just be starting there. UBS had a similar crack at another sort of look at the same theme. Where's the leverage in the battery materials space? And again, they came to the conclusion that if the world's fleet was electrified, you would require about 30 times growth to today's market for lithium raw material supply. And even in the case of Roskill, where you take a relatively conservative approach and say that 8% of our vehicles will be electrified by 2026, you still need well over 250% growth in the market. So incredible leverage to the lithium scene, and that's why it's such an important commodity to be in. And as much as I'd love to mention Tesla, it's not really the only story, far from it. The lithium-ion batteries are finding their way into lots of new technology. You can see the drones outside, of course, powered by lithium-ion batteries. There's even an electric lawnmower. I was blown away when I started researching that a while ago. There's about 20 of them on the market. Who would have thought? And then there's the concept of e-mobility. Anything that otherwise historically would have required a cord no longer requires a cord. The lithium-ion battery is light enough and carries enough power and has a long enough life that you can apply that battery to whatever technology otherwise historically had a cord. In this example, some devices out of a hospital. Lastly, the rechargeable battery market, it is a really big market in its own right. Before you've even thought about lithium-ion batteries, and the dominant one is, of course, lead acid. For those that worry about where battery technology might be headed, just remind yourself that the lead acid battery, obviously a really cheap source of storage, it's been around for 100 years. In the case of the lithium-ion battery, to commercialise it, to develop the technology so that it could be rolled out, even in limited scale, that took 30 years. And then it took another 10 to build up the critical mass in the lithium-ion supply chain to lower the cost enough that it's now finding its way into cars, grid storage, home storage. So battery technology doesn't flip on a dime. It takes a long time to make it work, and lithium-ion has clearly become the preferred technology. So how do you get the lithium-ion? This is where some interesting dynamics start to emerge in the industry. The industry is obviously rapidly changing. Historically, you would source brine from two independent supply chains. On the one hand, the brine sources of supply, where you're pumping lithium-rich salts from underground and enriching those salts. And then, at least to a slightly lesser extent, hard rock sources, where you're actually mining a rock, you're crushing it, and you're liberating the mineral. The industry is rapidly changing across those two supply chains because of the lithium-ion battery demand suite and the fact that it requires a materially higher grade to participate in that market. The material type referred to is battery grade lithium carbonate or battery grade lithium hydroxide. It's a higher specification than the historical norm. And as a result of that, some of the competitive advantage of the brine sources of supply historically is being eroded because it's higher cost to enrich your brine to become battery grade. Basically, there has to be more money spent on it than would have typically been the case historically for a battery grade source of supply. And that's why hard rock sources are starting to become, in the short term, they will absolutely dominate the growth of the lithium raw materials supply base. And it also, at least in part, explains why SQM might, for example, make an investment in a hard rock mine here in WA. The industry is rapidly changing, and the hard rock sources of supply are going to become very much relied on, and especially in China. So, moving on to China. I somewhat glibly mentioned Tesla. Tesla is the poster child of the sort of EV world and the lithium-ion battery world, and it's great because it lifts its profile. But actually the main game is absolutely China. China is going to dominate lithium raw material purchasing and ultimately the lithium-ion supply chain, the battery factories. And it's already happening. Between 2015 and 2016, raw material supply consumption grew by 30% in China. And the same thing is happening year to date. in 2017. Unfortunately for the Chinese, they don't have any natural competitive advantage. They don't have any high-grade, or not en masse anyway, any high-grade spodumene. They have some brine sources of supply, but they've been technically challenged. So they've been very heavily reliant on imported sources of supply, and especially spodumene. And as I said, spodumene is almost becoming the preferred source of lithium units because it immediately upgrades to battery-grade carbonate or battery-grade hydroxide. So a fantastic position to be in. The other thing that China is able to do is materially change the cost base. And here I'm reflecting on a couple of things that I think really make the lithium world an incredibly exciting place to be, and I would also suggest from an investment point of view. Firstly, today people are grossly underestimating how quickly the lithium-ion supply chain has to grow to match the demand, and especially that demand coming out of China. On the right-hand side of this slide, I'm referring to the experience in solar and solar panels. And you would probably know that one of the reasons why solar panels are so cheap to put on your roof today is because China materially upscaled the production capacity to meet a broader rollout of solar technology globally, including in China, of course. And in so doing, they materially lowered the cost. So here in the bottom right hand of that particular slide, I'm referencing the cost of solar power over about the last 7 or 8 years. And it's basically 25% of the cost it was in 2006. And one of the reasons why it's so cheap is because the Chinese materially lowered the cost of the solar panels. And exactly the same phenomenon is happening right now in lithium-ion supply chains. They are scaling up at an incredible pace, and they are going to materially lower the cost base. In fact, it's already happening. And that means the batteries find their way into more applications. And of course, everybody talks about EVs and I reckon ultimately energy storage as well, because the battery has just become the lowest cost rechargeable battery and very difficult to displace as a result of the capacity that's been rolled out. The other thing I'd like to touch on there, it's on the left-hand side, and that's how people adopt technology. And this is where there is a really big change emerging as the mobile fleets globally migrate towards electrification. The technology or the technological change is happening faster now than it has in previous decades. And I would argue the same thing is going to happen now with respect to the rollout of electric vehicles, and it won't be that long before we're all driving them, and I suspect probably Chinese ones to boot. So here's where we've come from. On the left-hand side, this is Roskill's trace of the lithium raw material that's gone into the lithium-ion battery market, and you can see that it's taken off in the last couple of years, and again, primarily driven by China, but you know, everyone likes to talk about the European car makers and Tesla. The main game is China. And on the right-hand side, their views as to what happens with respect to the future consumption in lithium-ion batteries. The market grows from today's about 100 gigawatt hours, give or take, to 1,000 gigawatt hours by 2026. So a 10-fold increase in lithium raw material consumption over that period of time. It's absolutely phenomenal. But here's the grab or the catch. That's only based on 8% of the cars sold being electric in 2026. To put that in context, that's 5 million Tesla Model S's. But every year, 90 million cars are sold. So for the adoption of this technology, there is further future potential and massive potential, I think, for there to be requirements for a lot more lithium raw material to satisfy the future demand. So a pretty amazing story. And with respect to cars themselves, again, that's rapidly changing. And to explain the dynamic here, I'll just reflect on a bit of my personal experience. I've been known to hang on to my cars for quite a while, and I have a reasonably old Land Rover today. I probably hang on to my car for something like 8 to 10 years. And I'll be buggered if today I'm going to sell that car and go and buy a new one, 70 grand, 100 grand, something like that. Why would you? Because it'll be like holding the BlackBerry in 2007. That's exactly what it's like. Because the world is about to change. And you don't want to be the one that's... Your BlackBerry was worth nothing in 2008. And that's what's going to happen to people's diesel cars, petrol cars, in contrast to purchasing an electric car. This is a really big problem for the incumbent car players because there is soon to be a buyer's strike of conventional cars for that very reason. And that's why, ultimately, it accelerates the adoption of the electric technology because they know at some point in time, nobody's going to want to buy that BlackBerry anymore. And that's why they're all actively developing EVs. It's huge. So this is a sweep from the Bloomberg guys across models being released between now and 2020. And it's coming out of absolute need by the incumbent car companies. They have to do it. They have to roll out the EV, they have to discount them, they have to sell them because the alternative is they don't buy their existing cars. That's how big a problem it is for them. And that's why the whole transition to the EV will happen much faster than people expect. Now, there are those of you that fret about infrastructure. I get that. Where are you going to charge your car? People worry about it. If there's mass adoption of electric vehicles, it's an issue. And it'll take some time potentially for those charging points to roll out. The Chinese got a solution for that problem too. They are building really high quality hybrids, plug-in hybrids, big battery packs, and they're doing it at an incredibly low cost. So again, if I reflect on my personal experience, I want to go and replace my Land Rover. And I go have a look at the Audi. And Audi sells a decent plug-in hybrid, but it costs you $25,000 more than the normal car. China's talking about building their hybrids for $2,000 a car, more than the conventional car. And the way that they're doing it is by seriously scaling up the manufacturing capacity of those hybrid vehicles. And that's how the car companies in China are going to beat the infrastructure constraint. They're going to establish the plug-in hybrid as a legitimate tool on the path to full EV applications. And of course, that means they need a lot more batteries, which is exactly what they're doing. And there is some evidence. So for those of you that are sceptical, it's happening right now. So here's a view across a couple of metrics that define what's happening in the industry. So here we've got the battery-grade carbonate price. It took a massive run last year, came off in the second half, and it's done nothing but go up since January 1st. And actually in the last month or so, it started to move again at a faster pace. And in parallel, the Chinese chemical players in the lithium industry, their market caps have taken off. And that's because the market's running hot. Everyone's scrambling for supply. The cathode makers are trying to lock down access to lithium carbonate and access to lithium hydroxide. And it's being recognised in the values. These are the listed players in the lithium scene in China. For the investment sphere, they're still so-so. Some of it has flowed through. So here we're looking at the major global integrated lithium, they're not integrated chemical businesses of which there's some lithium. And investors have been participating there, so they've been reasonably strong. But here's the rest. Here's the brine plays and here's the hard rock plays. It is running absolutely counter to the nature of the market in China itself. It's running hot, and we see it every day because we've got people knocking our door down saying, can we secure more supply? Well, unfortunately, you can't. We're sold out in stage 1, but we'd love to talk to you about stage 2 of our project. And yet that's not reflected in equity value in the projects. In my view, there is another wave to come. Okay, so let's move on. Why is Pilbara such an important part of the supply solution? It's huge. It's got some massive scale. It's high quality and it has the capacity to expand. Pilbara is the only project that's been able to definitively, at a pilot scale level of assessment, build technical grade product. Technical grade being very high purity spodumene, 7%, and ultra low iron. And it does it because it's a very clean spodumene and it recovers well. Out of all that, scale, location in the Pilbara, so close to the port of Port Hedland, the ability to keep expanding the operation, the high quality of the product, all translates to very low costs of operation. So actually, for the first 5 or 7 years, our cost base is $220 a tonne. Today, that product's selling for a minimum of $820 a tonne. If you're making a cash margin of $600 a tonne, over 350,000 tonnes sold, that's some serious cash flow, and we are not that far away from producing it. We should be shipping in the second quarter of 2018. We have fantastic partners in Ganfeng and General Lithium, and we are well and truly underway from a construction point of view. I'm looking forward to talking to you next year, having sent our first ship out. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Ken. That was very refreshing. We have time for a couple of questions if anybody wants to put a hand up. Just going to peer into the audience. Oh, there's one down here at the front. If we can get a microphone down, please. Thank you.
I'll just ask one, Ken. When you look at the whole market, it just seems easy, especially in the hard rock for spodumene, to scale it up. So you can probably do it fairly quickly. Others can too. What's the stop? And even though we have a great growth in this business, what's the stop and overbuild in the next 5 years?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, and I think the answer is pretty simple. There isn't a shortage of lithium in the ground, but what there is a shortage of is projects that recover the product well, that are close enough to the port and can generate some economies of scale to materially lower their cost base. And it's fair to say that Pilbara was developed pretty quickly. So from the time of discovery through to the time we first put ore on a ship, second quarter next year, it'll be about 4.5 years, maybe 5 years. The problem for the lithium-ion battery industry, and especially in China, was they needed those mines under development 3 or 4 years ago, and they just weren't. There's not enough coming through the pipeline to satisfy the requirements of the demand of the market. Another stark contrast. The chemical facilities, which by the way are being built out at a frantic pace, they only take about 18 months to build. And by any measure, it takes longer than 18 months to develop a mine. I think most people would appreciate that. In our case, as I said, 4 or 5 years. So yeah, there's a big disconnect between the ability of the market to respond, at least not in comparison to the way the supply has grown. The demand's grown, sorry.
Thank you.
Any more from the audience? Ken, I think you've bowled them over. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.